Hey, folks. Good afternoon. Welcome to another Esoterica Livestream. As you folks know, we like to do these every 3 weeks or so. Try to do a content creation cycle where I produce content for 3 weeks and then do a live stream to sort of follow up on that. As you can see behind me, there's a sort of Esoterica studio over there, as much as it is a studio. I can turn it over here, you can see it. So that's sort of what the study is looking like right now, because I'm in the process, as I think some of you know, I'm in the process of totally um, renovating this office, and so I've been working with my contractor. We just finished today going beneath here. This is on the second floor of my home, and so we've had to go underneath. And because this is going to be holding a lot more books and things like that, we had to beef up the joist underneath. So we were in the process of sistering some more joists underneath to really beef up that, so it could really carry the weight of the books. And yeah, so the next big phase is coming in here and really coming in here and really basically building out an entirely new office slash YouTube studio here inside the room. So you can see the little Esoterica studio again, if you ever want to see it from what I'm looking at. And you'll notice all the shelves are empty because all my books are packed up at the moment, or at least most of my books are packed up. And so I've gotten everything packed up, and the last thing that will leave will be the Esoterica studio, which will get moved somewhere else in the house. I don't know where it'll go. And then we'll be in the process of really unpacking everything here. So yeah, quite a project. I mean, it really is going to be a major thing to build out build-ins, and we're going to turn this terrible popcorn ceiling into a proper coffered ceiling, so it'll look really nice. And yeah, it's a lot of work, but I'm documenting it. So as we go into the process, I'll do some updates about sort of where the Esoterica book project or office project is, because as you can imagine, this room was never intended to be a YouTube studio slash full-scale library, and now it has become a full-scale library slash YouTube studio, and it needs to be more functional as both, because otherwise it's literally me carving space to walk through here by leaving a trail so that I can get through all the books that end up on the floor. So at any rate, if you're noticing it's a little bit more echoey in here, it's because there's not all the books and everything else in here to absorb the sound. So but I'm excited to get this project done. Hopefully it'll be done sometime in the first, it's May now. Hopefully it'll be done by the end of June. But that's not going to happen, is it? This is construction we're talking about. Nothing ever gets done when you're trying to actually construct something, do a construction project. So I'm thinking it's going to be a process that's going to get us through the summer, probably. I bet July it'll be the earliest we get it done. So also today is Lag Bomer. So for any folks out there observing Lag Bomer, I'm going to go try to do a little quick study of some Zohar or something this afternoon. As folks know, we're in the midst of the counting of the Omer, and basically in part of the Omer, on the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, we observe the yard site of the passing away of Shimon Bar Yochai, the great sage of the Zohar and the Kabbalah. And so that is the sort of a big day in at least a Kabbalistic calendar. And so I'm going to try to at least sneak in some kind of Kabbalistic study. I've been studying the Rambam's commentary on Pirkei Avos, which is a real classic, but I've only ever looked at it in Hebrew. My Hebrew is not super great. It's pretty good, but that's pretty hard Hebrew, all things told. And it's nice that there's an English translation out, so I'll be able to work back and forth on the Rambam's commentary on Pirkei Avot, which has been fun. So yeah, it's been a nice little build up to Shavuot. But what I've been working on, also I should say we're getting in some more incantation bowls. I know folks, the first group of incantation bowls, the first 50 that I had commissioned, basically all sold before they could even go live. So there was so much interest in people getting an incantation bowl that I commissioned another 50. Those arrived today. Unfortunately, 9 out of them broke, and 9 out of them broke in transit. Some of them, like this one, I mean, it's such a pity because it's just literally one break, right? Here's one of the ones that broke in transit. You can see Lilith there. And it's such a pity because literally it's just like this one break, right? So I think what I might do is I might repair these with like some kind of archival glue or something of like, really high quality glue and sell them as repaired. So maybe discount them and sell them as repaired. So I don't know, maybe would folks be interested in that? If your folks are interested in the incantation bowls, if you would be interested in one that's been repaired, repaired really well, and maybe I can offer those for a significant discount. But yeah, 9 of them broke in transit out of 50. So at any rate, I have 4 of them over here that I can see that I could probably repair. And Vera, my dear friend Vera is in the chat. Yeah, I think it would make it more authentic, more museum-like. Yeah, maybe I could repair them with some really cool like gold dust or whatever, the way the Japanese do it. But anyway, there's like 4 or 5 of them that I'm going to try to repair and then sell them for pretty steeply discounted. Also, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Angela Puka, is also in the chat. It's good. Got to hang out with Angela and Philip the other day and talk a little bit, which is always great to be able to do behind the scenes. One of the great things, about this whole YouTube world is meeting such lovely, amazing, thoughtful, brilliant folks like Angela and Philip and other folks. Get to celebrate Andrew Henry over at Religion for Breakfast. Just rolled over 1 million subscribers and really paved the way for the work that I do and other folks do. And just a great community. So really proud for Andrew rolling over 1 million subscribers. I think Philip's going to roll over 1 million subscribers at some point pretty soon. I think Esoterica will probably get to 1 million subscribers at some point in the next few months, maybe next 6 months or so. I don't know. So we'll see. But good to see you. Also, Hank. Good to see Hank in the chat as well. Some alumni from the Egypt trip. Which, speaking of the Egypt trip, I'm going to have on Ike Baker in just a little bit. Folks may know Ike from the Arcanum podcast. Ike is a friend of the channel. Is a great guy. Really like Ike, and he's also doing a Egypt trip later this year with Argos, the company that I work with myself. And Ike's doing a trip, and he's going to be looking for folks who may want to go with him. And so he's going to come on at about 2:30. So here in about half an hour or so, my time, if you want to learn more about his trip. And again, the cool thing about this, about Ike's trip, is that his is going to be much more practitioner based. Mine, of course, my trip was much more historically based because I am not a practitioner, and so his is going to be much more practitioner based. And so that will be a good fit for folks who have a totally different way of doing things. So we'll have Ike on here in about half an hour. Talk about his trip, and folks want to sign up for it and go to Egypt with Ike. I'd really recommend you do that. He's a great guy. But what have we been working on? We got the next episode and what is basically a low-key history of our introduction to Paracelsus. Paracelsus is one of these characters that it's so important in the history of Western esotericism, but most people don't really read Paracelsus. He's a bit like Agrippa. I think people talk a big game about Agrippa. They talk a big game about the 3 books of occult philosophy. They talk a big game about Paracelsus. But when you ask them what's the last Paracelsus book that they read, they haven't really read any Paracelsus. And I talked about in the episode why people don't read Paracelsus, and it's for lots of it is for lack of translations, and Paracelsus was a terrible writer. And so I've been sort of very slowly rolling out what is going to be, I think, 10 episodes as sort of an introduction to the thought of Paracelsus. So we just covered the Paragranum and the Paramirum. There's one more episode I need to make on the Paramirum and on the Matrix. So we need to cover that. But after that, we'll turn to his some of his more cosmological and theological works. So so I'm looking forward to doing those as well. And I'm sorry the video looks kind of like off kilter slightly. It looks like sort of like, I'm not quite sure why it's not quite why I look like I'm on an incline. I think it's because this table's on incline. So but yeah, so we did the episode on the invisible diseases by Paracelsus, which is just classic classic Paracelsus stuff. So it was really good to do that. Did the episode on Marguerite Porete, which also wrapped up a series on the so-called the four apostles of the Middle Ages, so-called as by Bernard McGinn. And if they're good enough for Bernard McGinn, they're good enough for me. And so that wrapped up the series on these really important women mystics in the Middle Ages. Sadly, for whatever reason, the algorithm really did not like that episode. I don't even know exactly why the algorithm disliked it so much, but it did. Sometimes you eat the bar and sometimes the bar eats you. And I guess that's what goes with the algorithm as well. And so that episode performed really poorly for whatever reason. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's just, you cast things off into the void and some things catch and some things don't. But that wraps that episode that will sort of bring together Heidewig, Mechthild of Magdeburg, Angela Foligno, and finally Marguerite Porete. But I'm really looking forward to getting into even more obscure women mystics. I think the next one I really want to do is Beatrice of Nazareth. Beatrice of Nazareth is hugely important. In fact, she had a huge impact on Marguerite Porete. And so we'll cover Beatrice of Nazareth, which is, again, another really important lady mystic for the Middle Ages. And also want to cover some of the more obscure dude mystics too. I don't want to cover Meister Eckhart yet. I may get to him eventually, but I feel like there's a lot of content on Meister Eckhart. I know that Phillips has done some good stuff on Meister Eckhart. I think that the two that I want to cover are Tauler. I want to cover Tauler, and I want to cover Suso. Tauler and Suso don't get their day in the sun. It's always Meister Eckhart. And I think that part of what people don't really understand is that Meister Eckhart, Tauler, and Suso kind of run in a circuit, which is to say Eckhart is sort of the brains behind the project. Tauler is the popularizer, really, of the stuff. He could kind of go into a pub and talk about, the eye that I see God with is the same God, the eye that God sees with me with, or whatever that Eckhart says. He popularizes it. He's able to take really, really, really complicated mystical ideas and make them engaging. And so Tauler is really, really important for that. And finally, Suso, in the way that Meister Eckhart is sort of the brains of the project, Suso is really the heart of the project. And he's much more emotive and much more Hasidish or something. I don't know how to say it, but he's much more sort of emotive and passionate. And so Suso, Tauler, and Eckhart form a kind of circuit, and I really want to cover Suso and Tauler because they don't really get their day in the sun. And then, of course, sort of bring all that home. I'd want to bring home the Theologica Deutsch, which is hugely important on people like Martin Luther. So then there's a Cloud of Unknowing, which is another important text that I haven't gotten to yet. So there's lots of good stuff in the Christian mystical tradition that I'm and just in the Western mystical tradition. This is not counting the East, where I'm far less trained and have far less education. The West is just chock full of really amazing stuff in the mystical tradition that I'm really looking forward to getting at. But who else? I'm trying to think of anyone else jumps immediately to mind that I want to do. I want to do an episode on Nicholas of Cusa and the idea of learned ignorance. That's a topic that is really important that doesn't get a lot of coverage. Is the concept of learned ignorance, and it's a concept that does play a role in the development of Western esotericism, especially how a kind of fidelity and a kind of skepticism come together in people like Cornelius Agrippa. So definitely want to cover that as well. Simon, you're asking about German idealists. In fact, your question is prescient, because I'm about to do an episode this coming week on Kant and why Kant is, I think, ignored by Western esotericism, but at the great peril. And so, and also the fact that Kant is often read as a kind of anti-mystic, when in fact there is a deeply mystical strain to Kant, especially in the way that I think, and other scholars think, or some scholars think, Swedenborg had a direct influence on Kant. And in fact, the Copernican turn, in some ways may be influenced by his reading of Swedenborg. So so at any rate, we're gonna do a big episode on Kant. One of the big challenges about doing an episode on Kant is trying to do it in such a way that, on the one hand, doesn't become just a long explainer of the critical philosophy, which that is a thing that there are lots of good ones on the internet, but also how to talk about Kant in a way that doesn't use all his jargon, then in a way that makes people sound smart, but actually makes it much more difficult to get a handle on what Kant's actually talking about. So I'm going to try to write the episode basically using all the jargon, all the Kantian jargon, and I'm going to go back through and try to like de-jargonize it, because I don't know how you guys feel. Often my sense is that people who use a lot of philosophical jargon often don't know what they're talking about. They're just hiding behind they're hiding behind jargon, and they don't know what they're talking about. And so what I want to do is explain Kant without recourse to all the Kantian jargon, which I think that when you're around other people who are philosophy PhDs, it's fine to use all that jargon. But when you're just talking to normal people with normal brains and normal educations, the jargon becomes an impediment to actually appreciating Kant and appreciating what I think is a extremely decisive philosophical moment in Western history, maybe the most important philosophical moment in Western history of the modern period. So, at any rate, speaking of German idealism, we are not just going to get into German idealism. We're going to be at the very core, the very heart of German idealism, in the way that Kant conceives of Kant's relationship to mysticism, and to what degree is mysticism possible after the critical turn, which I. While not a Kantian myself, I do think that there is no legitimate philosophy after Kant that doesn't deal with him, which is to say, you can't be taken seriously as a philosopher of any kind if you don't have some kind of stance to the critical philosophy. And I think that's true. I'd stand by that. I might die on that hill. You don't have to agree with Kant, and I don't. At least about the deduction and stuff like that. And I'm not sure he even agreed about the deduction. But at any rate, I'll come to that. What else are we working on? Oh, yeah, we did the episode on the first library. This is a series that I've been wanting to do for a while. That I asked everyone I think I did a poll where, hey, look, I want to do an episode on libraries, a series on libraries. And I was kind of thinking, man, people are going to be sort of all over the place about whether or not they really want to listen to a bunch of episodes on libraries. But of course, so many folks who are fans of Esoterica are also a fan of libraries, because libraries are just, thank God for libraries. And may the people who defund libraries, may their memory be erased. And so, I'm really looking forward to getting into some history of libraries. We covered the first one, the earliest libraries, over in ancient Sumer, and then we're going to transition next time to the earliest Babylonian libraries and the earliest Egyptian libraries. So those are going to be mostly libraries in the Middle Kingdom, with the exception of the Old Kingdom holdings at Abu Ghraib. Which was interesting. I was just there. We were, several of us there were there a few months ago on the Egypt trip. And of course, that site is closed to the public. We were only able to get access to it because of the way we organized the trip. And it was an interesting thing to walk around and think, like, this is this somewhere over here, right? We don't know exactly where it was, but in one of the mortuary mortuary temples was probably one of the earliest known archives and one of the earliest known um, 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 religious art libraries to have ever existed, of which we have any evidence. So it was neat roaming around there and thinking to myself, like, am I standing inside of what would have been the oldest recoverable Egyptian library? Not to say it is the oldest. We don't know what the oldest was, but at least the oldest for which we have any evidence. And it was very humbling to be walking around, poking my head around and thinking, where was that library? Because it was somewhere around. So, so it was great to walk around there and do that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into the next episode on that. And what else? I did great conversation with Dr. Kip Davis, which was a lot of fun, talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is something that I'm very interested in. I think a lot of folks are interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and talking to Kip. And again, it's really great to be able to make connections with other YouTubers and folks who are working in academia, just sort of upping the game when it comes to accessibility in terms of YouTube education. Because I think one of the real mistakes that we make is assuming that everyone who's watching YouTube videos is an entry-level, beginner-level person interested in this material. There's a lot of folks out there with a lot of education. And so I'm really glad to be able to sort of up the bar. And that's what Esoterica can do. You know, I'm glad that this channel is not meant to be an introductory level channel. And because it's not an introductory level channel, we can up the bar and talk, you know, a little bit higher level, a good bit higher level than maybe other channels who are doing much more introductory kind of material. And so I'm really glad to be able to do that and, you know, jump on with someone like Kip and Dr. Davis and just really get into technical stuff in the Dead Sea Scrolls without having to worry about what is it? You know, we can bring our audience along with us, as opposed to assuming that everyone in the audience is an entry level stuff, and that's certainly not true. A lot of you guys out there's a lot of wisdom for the folks that watch this channel. So, this is an interesting comment. It was close to Grenoble. Yeah, I want to do an episode researching where Agrippa is really buried. That'd be great. You know, if you want to do that, you should shoot me a message. I'd love to figure out. I'd love to know what because I don't know if that church is even still there. It's a Dominican church, and I don't even know what's still there. I'd love to also know what is over in Nettesheim. Nettesheim is, of course, where Agrippa's from. He's not from Cologne. He sort of takes up that banner later. But I wonder if the little town of Nettesheim, I've looked at it on Google Maps. I've walked through it on Google Maps. But so far as I know, I don't think there's any statue of Agrippa there. We should raise money and get a statue of Agrippa, assuming that the people of Nettesheim would like a statue of Agrippa, of course. But I'd love to do it'd be cool to do a fundraiser and actually get a Agrippa statue put up either in Cologne or in Nettesheim. But at any rate, yeah, if you find State of Survival, if you go to Grenoble and get some footage and figure out where Agrippa's buried, it would be dope, as the young people say. That would be super cool. To let folks know what's going on. We're going to be joined in a minute by Ike Baker, who, like I said, is leading a trip to Egypt, and I want to give him a platform to talk about his trip and promote it a little bit. So he's going to be on the channel for maybe half an hour, starting at about 2:30, so in about 5 minutes from now. And then after that, starting at about 3, at least my time, I'm going to I'll be taking questions in. So if you're putting questions in the chat, especially if you're putting in supers, one, thank you, and two, I will come back to them after Ike signs off at about 3 o'clock or whenever. So yeah, absolutely. Feel free to drop your questions in if you want to get them in the queue. Again, super thanks and super chats are always appreciated, of course. Although I try to get to all the questions as best I can, regardless of whether anyone donates any money. Just because you shouldn't be just folks who were able to financially contribute to do the Q&As. But I will I will try to get to those after I chat with Ike here in just a minute. But oh yeah, I guess the big other thing I can talk about briefly before Ike jumps on is we dropped the new Esoterica Rare Book Catalog. And again, folks, if you want to enter into the drawing to win this bad boy or girl, this the Cours de Chimie by Lemery. This is a fantastic book of alchemy. It's 350 something years old. If you want to enter into the chance to win this volume, which is very dusty, and I think that's going to make me sneeze. If you want to win it, just again leave a chat, leave a chat, or go over. The best way to do it is to go over to our Instagram, which I'll throw in the chat, and sign up for Instagram. Leave a comment or whatever, and you can enter into the chance to win this this wonderful volume, 350-year-old book of alchemy. So we're giving this away, and you're absolutely I hope folks would try to win it. It'd be great. There's a lot of cool volumes over at Esoterica Rare Books. Let me throw the links in the chat so folks can get access to them. So if you want to check out the catalog, which has some really cool books in it. So there's Esoterica Rare Books. That is the rare book business of myself and Dr. Morgan Meese, dear friend of mine and colleague. There's our Instagram, and one of my favorite books, in the catalog is this one. I don't know if you can see it. This is the collected works of Pico, like that Pico. All right. See, Pici Opera Omni. And my favorite thing about this book is it says on the cover, prohibito, forbidden, because as you probably know, Pico's works were the first works that seeded the Index Prohibitorum, the list of banned books by the Catholic Church. And this was the first real book to end up on the list of banned books. And this is a collection of Pico's collected works. This is Pico's collected works, including his famous book on astrology. This book is even interesting because it's been edited by the censor. This copy would have contained a copy of De Arte Cabalistica by Reuchlin, and that copy, many copies like this, have had that excised by the censor. And so, at any rate, this is just one of the coolest books, in my opinion, on the thing. And I love that still it has Prohibito still written on the cover. So this one's still available, FYI. So if you want to go take a look at it, take a look at our bookstore over at Esoterica Rare Books, and take a look at it. But with no further ado, friend of the channel and super smart. Again, I'm always impressed by practitioner folks that are so well educated and so deeply invested in their spirituality, and they're able to generate all of that into a coherent package that is somehow deeply spiritually daring, but also intellectually humble. That's a person like Ike. Ike really does. Ike is really able to combine those, and it's a real honor and pleasure to bring him on. So let me put Ike up on the stage. Ike, buddy, welcome.
Hey,
welcome to Esoterica, man. How you doing?
I'm great. It's great to be here. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. It's just talking about you a little bit and showing some old books off for the book catalog. But so, man, I heard you're going to Egypt. I heard you're taking some people with you. What's the story?
Yeah, that's the word on the street, man.
Tell us about it.
I guess I'll just for anybody that's not familiar with any of the work that I've done, first I host the Arcanum YouTube channel and podcast, so I do documentary style presentations on primarily the esotericism in Western civilization. That's the new way we're putting that. So and I host a podcast, which you've been a guest on twice now. You were on a couple weeks ago. And we talked about your trip to Egypt, which was really cool. I saw somebody actually. I was watching before I stepped into the studio, and somebody asked if you had done any interviews because they bet that your backstory and you being interviewed would be fascinating. So indeed, Dr. Sledge has been interviewed. You can check out 2 of them on the channel. But for anybody, I guess, that's interested in what I'm going to be doing in Egypt, I should probably explain that my primary training as a practitioner is in Western ceremonial, the theurgic magic of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, really, which is based in, I guess you'd call it like the magical or the Hermetic Kabbalah. But I also am trained in, evocational, celestial, angelic magic in the tradition of Agrippa, Ficino, stuff like the Heptameron, etc. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I've got somewhere in the ballpark of 10 years in the Golden Dawn now. Just as an initiator, teacher, and administrator, I run the North Carolina Temple out of Asheville of the Cicero HOGD. And I got about 20 plus years in other forms of ceremonial and work with the energy body. So that's a little bit about, I guess, me to qualify what I'm going to talk about a little bit here today. I've been to Egypt a few times as well. I organized the Hermopolis Symposium with Mervat Nasser at her new Hermopolis village in Minya, Egypt. That was fantastic. I met a lot of really great, really incredible scholars there. But so this year, October 18th to the 26th, we are, and by we I mean I'm facilitating, but Argos Destinations is my partner. So they've been fantastic throughout this entire experience, and they also ran your trip. I'm sure you mentioned that as well. So I'm very excited for all the work that they're doing. Really great stuff, because I'm only crazy enough to say yes. I'm not crazy enough to think of something like that. So Argos was really bold in reaching out and seeing if I wanted to do this, and of course I said yes. But it's going to be 9 days and 8 nights. It's a field immersive excursion called Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Theurgy, and I'll give like a little sampler of the itinerary. But first I want to talk about how I've done a lot of work in this particular milieu over the last 6 years or so, because it's just a primary interest of mine in terms of magic and esotericism. I'm going to be teaching the history, theory, and practice of this stuff. So that's a pretty bold statement, right? Because we don't have a whole lot of the practice. And I heard you mention something about humility earlier, and I do feel like I have to exercise a bit of epistemological humility in talking about the ritual reconstructions that I've done. So I qualify myself being able to do these things based off of my experience and my training. You get a lot of training in something like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And based on that, I've been able to reconstruct what I feel is it's not just arbitrary, and I think it is as satisfactory a modern reconstruction of the techniques of theurgy that one could find right now. So I'm going to be teaching the history, theory, and practice of that. For all the nerds out there, we're all book nerds. I've used a bunch of primary sources, and I'll just kind of rattle a few off. Obviously, I relied heavily on De Mysteriis by Iamblichus, De Anima, Finnemore's translation, on the hieratic art, which that Pachumi edition cost a pretty penny. It's real. So I used some of the PGM. I'm not going to tell you which ones, because you got to come on the trip for that. I used primarily, I used the Corpus Hermeticum. Obviously, we know Iamblichus was basically a Hermetic theurgist. So I've really kind of found some choice snippets. Volter Hanegraaff actually helped point me to Corpus Hermeticum 13. Obviously, I'm using the Poimandros and Copenhaver's editions of most of the Hermetica. The Celestial Hierarchy, Pseudo-Dionysius, Discourse on the Eighth and the Ninth from Nag Hammadi, Refutation of All Heresies by Hippolytus actually has some pretty tasty bits in it, particularly concerning Hecate. I used parts of the Iliad as well. The Hymn to King Helios by Julian the Apostate. Of course, there's lots of Porphyry and Plotinus kind of sprinkled in, leaned on What Is Up to Us by Porphyry. Ficino's 3 books, can't go without that. Critical edition by Cask and Clark. Various works by Michael Sellis, specifically his stuff on like icons and statue animation, even though there's not a whole lot of statue animation in Sellis, like really meaty material. And for the contemporary stuff, I used a lot of Greg Shaw because he's incredible. Alcisus Divinis, Jeff Kupperman, Brian Patrick Alt's doctoral thesis. I think this is more of a recent thing. It's called Correspondences and Invocations, Sacred Materials, Divine Names, and Subtle Body Physiology, Iamblichus and Related Literature. That has been blowing my mind. Has been blowing my mind. So that was really timely for me that I got my hands on that. I used some work by P.D. Newman, Crystal Addy, Aaron Evans, John Opsopaus, even a little bit of Chris Brennan's Hellenistic Astrology, Skinner's Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Magic, and a whole bunch of essays that I got on academia. So I've put a lot of work into this. I put a lot of thought into this, and I think that people who are looking for I mean, if you're interested in the Esoterica channel and what Dr. Sledge does, you're likely interested in that sort of rigorous scholarship behind this stuff. So we're going to be doing on-site travel. I think that's super important to mention, because a bunch of people have been like, "What's the Zoom link?" Like I've said it a few times. We're going to be there. So we've got private access to a couple of really incredible temple sites. We're going to have on-site demonstrations followed by group and one-to-one tutorials and lectures. So it's basically for people who are interested in the Hellenistic and Greco-Roman Egyptian period in Egypt, the broader Mediterranean as well at that time, and interested in ancient Egypt, ceremonial magic, theurgy. But I also, my big thing was that I wanted this to be a personal initiatory journey for each of the participants. So there's a lot of onboarding, or a few onboarding materials that are structured and curated leading up to our departure to Egypt to assist in preparing for that journey, which I think it's super important. So we're going to start off, obviously, in Cairo. We're going to do a magical tour of the Egyptian Museum and then a session on theurgy and harmonia. That's the first day. There's a lot going on, so I'm just going to give the major points. Day 2, we're going to the Saqqara necropolis, visit the Pyramid of Unas. Day 3, the Great Sphinx, the pyramid complexes, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Day 4 and 5, we're at the Abydos. We're at Abydos and the Osirion. So obviously the legendary tomb of Osiris. We've got private access here. So for anybody also familiar with Golden Dawn style magic and its derivatives, we're going to be doing a mystic repast there of Osiris the Justified in the Osirion. So that's very exciting for me. I'm going to visit the Osiris temple, do workshops, have lectures. Day 6 is Dendara. So Dendara for me, right? I traveled to ancient sites in Europe and beyond, the UK, Italy, Greece, Iceland, and Dendera for me, really, it just blew my mind. I was completely speechless. So, and I ended up there by accident when I went. So, because you know how the road closes down, and like your like plans for the day could just be, sometimes shot. So, we ended up at Dendara, but we've got private access to Dendera. We're going to be doing some fun stuff there. Day 7 and 8, we're going to be on the west and east banks of Luxor, respectively. We've got the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings, the Ramesseum. And then we're going to spend some private time at some of the goddess sanctuaries at Karnak, particularly the Sekhmet enclosure, which is actually closed to the public. So we're going to be in there privately doing some work. And then day 9, is our goodbyes and departures. So it's going to be a whirlwind trip. I'm going to say it's for somebody that's like me, that's interested in this stuff. It's probably like a once in a lifetime thing, especially with that initiatory component blended in there.
I mean, it sounds like a really, like you said, a really whirlwind trip. And one of the things that's really cool about the trip, especially vis-a-vis the trip I did, is that you're going to be in both Upper and Lower Egypt. My trip focused almost exclusively on sort of Cairo, Middle Egypt, Alexandria. And this is cool because you'll be, not traveling the entire length of Egypt, but definitely getting all the way down to, to Luxor. And so that's a cool part of the trip that I think is really neat.
Yeah, especially as it was Thebes and the sort of capital of Egypt for a while. It had the HQ of the pharaohs. Really excited about that. Although I got to say, when I did go to Alexandria, I loved it. So it's all sorts of crazy and cool and just super, super interesting. So I would like to have gotten there, but I mean, all this stuff is fantastic. And, I don't know, maybe that's another trip. Who knows? No clue.
No, it sounds like a really exciting trip. And again, I think it's a nice complement to the sort of trip I did. It's just, exclusively academic, exclusively intellectual. This is a cool combination of scholarly and practitioner oriented. So I think for folks who are interested in getting to Egypt and, having some non BS, actual really engaging with the historical material in a practice oriented fashion, really would encourage folks to check out Ike's trip. Ike, do you mind putting a link in the chat
Sure,
for your trip, the itinerary and all that, so folks can see it?
Yeah, I've got that open. I will. You know what? Let me just go side by side here to the to your live stream, and I'll throw it in the chat. And for anybody that's also interested, you can check out my website. It's just ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER.com, and there are links there, but I'm going to throw them in the chat right now.
Yeah, put both of them in the chat. And folks, again, this is Argos really did right by me in terms of making everything on my trip work really well. Aubrey was really, really fantastic, and the crew, the Egyptian crew on the ground there was really fantastic. And so those are the same folks working with Ike. And again, I really try to even, I'm a non-practitioner. I'm not a practitioner of Western esotericism of any kind, but this is a place where I really want to be able to say that Esoterica, while it is a scholarly channel and a academic channel, I do want to lift up voices of folks who are in the practitioner community, especially really cool things like this, where you have some combination of real scholarship and also a practitioner-oriented kind of trip. So yeah, take it as an invitation or an endorsement by me that if you weren't able to go to Egypt with me, and you want to do something like that, then I would really recommend Ike's trip. And then again, that's really what I really do think it's going to be a fantastic trip.
Thank you, man. Yeah, I mean, people like yourself have really raised the bar for people like me who are practitioners and would consider ourselves teachers of the practical stuff in this tradition. So, thank you for everything that you do and that you've done for our communities, because it's a real boon. Like a lot of this stuff is only a lot of stuff that I'm doing is really only possible because of people like yourself and Dana Trell and Angela Puka and Philip and people like that, really pushing us to raise the bar, but also making it engaging. It's not always when you take, let's say, comparative religions and stuff in a university course. It's not always right. It's kind of, you got to luck out kind of, or I don't know. When I went to school, we didn't have rate my professor. So, but that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
But so it's super engaging, and I appreciate you having me on to talk about some of this stuff.
No, absolutely. And again, it's my pleasure to be able to and lift up voices of folks in the practitioner community doing really, really cool stuff. Because again, one of the lessons I think we can all learn is that, the history of esotericism is full of somewhat predatory, disingenuous people who are, just perfectly willing to make stuff up for a buck, and claim, right? Oh no, I got all this from real history, and this is all, or people like Billy Carson, these people who are just charlatans. And that's why I say, it's really important for us academics to really lift up the voices of people who are engaging with the scholarship in a really thoughtful way, but also doing it in a way that's practitioner oriented. Because if academics don't lift up the voices of people who are doing cool stuff like Ike, well, we're just going to let the voices of like charlatans and hucksters and frauds and other kinds of people fill the gap. And it's absolutely my pleasure to be able to use the platform of Esoterica to empower people who I think are doing really, really cool stuff. So I really,
man.
Like I said, really would encourage folks, if you want to go to Egypt with Ike, and coming from a practitioner point of view, deeply informed by the historical scholarship, I would really say, folks, you should take a look at Ike's trip. It seems to be a really, really cool spiritual adventure.
Yeah, and what's really cool too is going back into the historical record and availing ourselves as practitioners of these, particularly the primary materials. It's like startling sometimes to see the confluence, the similarities between what we, the phenomenology of it as a modern person, and how those things are connected and they relate to somebody like Iamblichus, right? He writes about in the practice of photogogia, right? He talks about the fantasia, the imagination, or really, if you want to talk about it in terms of like the way Henri Corbin talked about it, the imaginal. Mm-hmm. Iamblichus talks about how I think I'll try and paraphrase, but I may butcher it. He says the mind and attention follow what happens, but they are not seized by the gods, the deities. But the imagination, or the imaginal, the fantasia, is seized by the deities and lifted above what is ordinarily human. So now, as a practitioner who was, before I even knew who Iamblichus was having these kind of, experiences, particularly in what we call vision, right? In the utilizing the imaginal. We don't just think of it as like bunkum. We think of it as a power of the soul, and having these really kind of jarring, startling experiences where at a certain point, the only way to describe it is you say, I am not thinking this. I don't know how to, I don't have words to describe this autonomy that the vision has appeared to have taken. Now, regardless of whether or not you believe that there are deities and they are seizing your imagination, I'm reading somebody who, like, almost 2,000 years ago was talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so as a practitioner, it's like, these are the things we need to read and connect with in terms of, a serious practice and a really, I guess, a trusted voice, at least for nerds like me. If it's good enough for Iamblichus, it's good enough.
Sure, no, definitely. And again, this is always what strikes me as so, I don't know what the right way of putting this is, embarrassing in some ways. For like, I see some of these internet grifters who don't even avail themselves of these amazing texts. I'm like, look, you could be a grifter and at least sound smart. You're a grifter and you sound ridiculously stupid. Like, you're just uninformed and predatory. Like, wow, like the double whammy of that. But again, I think that again, this is the idea that you can, at some level, do these reconstructions and build these things back up and utilize them, and then they still have phenomenological power to this day. It's just it's inspiring. I mean, to me, as a It's not my religious path. It's not my spiritual path. But from a distance, I can still find it very inspiring and saying, that antiquity isn't just a bunch of, voices from the dead. They can be very much alive and very much inspiring people to intellectual and spiritual transformation, which is just amazing. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And they certainly weren't primitive, in
No.
the way that we have for the last maybe 100 years thought of them. One of the funniest things for me is reading like the Elements of Theology by Proclus and reading E.R. Dodds's introduction, where he's basically apologizing for translating it.
Yeah.
It's just they did not treat these things with the due respect. But what really the thread that I was able to kind of grab and pull at in order to do this was, I would say personally, and this isn't necessarily a scholarly opinion, but I've written about it in both of my books, I think. But I do think that theurgy is a body of techniques, obviously, but what we would call magic, right? That technology, that techne, that craft, right, applied to the purposes of spiritual development, which to them would consist of, catharsis and elevation, purification and elevation. So there's techniques. You got to know the theory. You got to have an airtight version of the theory and the cosmology. Cosmology is extremely important in theurgy. But once you understand that there are techniques, you can start, it's religious ritual. It's religious ritual. There's invocation, there's prayer, there is, a partaking of the synthemata of the gods through either the eyes, the mouth, or the nose, even the ears, right? So once you understand that there are techniques, you can sort of isolate them, find them out, and then extrapolate. You can start pulling things from places and saying, okay, this is a prayer. Okay, this is an invocation. This is the animation of a statue, right? Telestike. And you can just start working from there. You need to, in my opinion, for something to be, I would say, as authentic as it can be, you should probably have like a really firm basis in the performance and construction of ritual, at least in the Western tradition of ceremonial. I think that goes a long way, because I don't have to learn all that stuff. I've got a template, I've got a rubric, and I can sort of figure it out from there. So, but a lot of this stuff, it's not retrievable. A lot of it is, I'm not going to try and pretend like, right. I'm not a grifter. I don't want to pretend like, I've perfectly captured this thing, but I will say that it's many years of study and practice have gone into it. And I even watched a few of your videos too. They were extremely helpful.
I'm glad.
Yeah, man. So
I'm glad. Yeah. And also, just from a historical point of view, the truth of the matter is that it wasn't like they even agreed with each other. Porphyry and Iamblichus don't agree about how to do any of this. The role of sacrifice is totally debated between the two. So it's not like there was the way of doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
right.
And so I think that this is another thing that people have to settle with, is that anyone who claims to know the way it was done is just laughably incorrect, because there wasn't one way. Iamblichus himself wasn't Egyptian. He was a Syrian in Egypt, and he learned it and he adopted it, and he disagreed with Porphyry, and so I think that the truth of the matter is, it's always a reconstruction.
Yes.
Even when Iamblichus was doing it, like, it wasn't like there was like a book fell out of the heavens and it was like theurgy 101. They had to make it up. They had to sort it out. They had to tinker and experiment. And I'm sure they were looking back to older sources and trying to bring in. So I think that this is a point that should be made really clearly, is that you don't have to apologize for saying, I'm doing what I'm doing is reconstructing, because they were reconstructing too. I think the most important point to make out, right, is that what separates a ritual experimentalist from a grifter is the grifter is always going to tell you this is the way.
Right. Yeah.
This is I uniquely have the power to tell you how to do theurgy. And
The one true
Yamplichus didn't
path.
have that power. Yeah.
No, but for anybody that's worried, I err on the side of Porphyry in terms of animal sacrifice. So there'll be none of that.
Yeah, I think we probably should all. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah, I
interesting
mean,
that is the place where at least contemporary people, they will follow Yamblichus to that bridge, and that is the bridge that they will not cross. Yamblichus
absolutely.
really put a lot of emphasis on animal sacrifice, and for good reasons. I mean, obviously, Porphyry, I think, has carried the day in that respect. But
Yes, yeah, and I mean, like even Skinner points out in his techniques of Greco-Egyptian magic, he talks about in some instances, right, and like the PGM, really, that was his focus for that. I'm pretty sure that was his doctoral thesis too, and then it ended up getting published. But he talks about how some of the more gruesome formulas actually were references to herbs, and even though they sounded, you know, I think one of them was like hen's blood or something like that, and it was its specific type of ink that was made from a specific type of organic, you know, material. So that's another interesting idea to explore. For myself, I don't see how we can know that, you know, entirely, incontrovertibly, beyond the shadow of a doubt. But I think that's an interesting thing for people to be aware of.
Sure. And also just that most of the sacrifices that you see in texts like Picatrix and the PGM were just auxiliary to the normal process of killing animals that was happening anyway.
Right.
You know, people think, oh, all this pigeon blood. I'm like, well, it's because they eat pigeons in Egypt.
Yeah.
Like getting pigeon blood was just going next door. It wasn't like, you know, this was, you know, we're so removed from industrial animal agriculture that we don't realize, you know, like, no, this is like, they were killing animals all the time. And so getting access to that kind of material was much easier for original practitioner. You know, I think there's a great one about goat bile, where you need some goat bile to keep insects out of your house. And you're like, yeah, you can't get goat bile these days so easily. But back in the day, there was somebody probably sacrificing a goat that week or killing a goat for food or whatever. And that bile would have, yeah. So it's a different world back then. But
that's a good point. That's a real good point.
Just a different world. Well, Ike, I want to wish you the very best on your Egypt expedition, folks. And again, take this as an endorsement. Again, even as a non-practitioner, folks, what I want to do is I want to be able to point people in the direction of practitioners who I do think are doing intellectually rigorous, scholarly rigorous, and also doing work that I think has integrity. Right. And so I hope it's never said that, you know, Justin Sledge and Esoterica have no connection to the practitioner community. It's just that I want to be able to point to people, you know, like Ike and other practitioners that I've had on who I do believe have integrity and who I do believe are have the combination of ceremonial integrity combined with intellectual humility and trying to produce a kind of synthesis of spirituality and scholarship that I do think is admirable. It's really admirable. So yeah, I really hope I wish you the very best on your trip, and I really encourage folks that if this is a thing that you are interested in, getting over to Egypt, seeing these sites, doing that, I really recommend you take a look at Ike's course and Ike's tour in Egypt.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me today, Justin, and thanks for everybody that's watching. Thanks for letting me drop in on your hangout. It was great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You're more than welcome. I hope to see you soon. And yeah, like leave maybe email me some links so I can just put them in the description and stuff after I sign off, and so folks can have them. But yeah, feel free to throw them in the chat one more time if you want.
Sure.
So.
Sure. Yeah. And for anybody that has any questions or comments, wants to reach out to me personally, I try to make myself somewhat accessible. So if you go to my website, ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER. There's like a little widget in the bottom. It's a text widget. You can ask me a question. Please be nice, but you can message me anything, ask questions, introduce yourself. And within reason, I enjoy meeting and discussing things with new people and like-minded people. So thanks again.
Awesome. That's awesome, Mike. Well, good luck on getting folks on the trip, and much hatzlacha, as we'd say, much success, and I really wish you the very best.
All right, brother. Take care. Thanks.
Yep, take it easy.
Bye.
All right, guys. Let's take some questions. Really appreciate Ike being able to jump on, and I really do wish him the very best on the trip. I really do think it is such a cool thing to be able to take folks interested in ritual practice and really combine this stuff into something really, really neat over in Egypt. And again, I've worked with Argos, with Aubrey, and I really trust Argos and really trust Aubrey, and I had a great experience with her. And so I'm sure this trip will be fantastic. So let's take some questions, folks. Let's do some Q&A. Let's see what time. Yeah, 3 o'clock. Great. I have a little time. Let's try to jump through some of these really fast. Thank you, Greg, for the super sticker. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And also, Greg, Kant is very interesting. I agree. Kant, I think, is very, very interesting. I think that he's so. I mean, he's just so critically important. But it won't be an 8-hour episode. I'm gonna, like I said, my goal is to be as succinct as possible to really introduce the core problem or problematic in Kant vis-a-vis the question of mysticism, and do that in a way that is that again doesn't require a lot of people to have a bunch of background in Kant. So I do think it'll be a fun episode. I'm looking forward to writing it. Thank you. Has anyone attempted to treat the Amarna letters in terms of how the events they describe may relate to the exodus of former prophets? So the Amarna letters, folks, are a series of, it's a diplomatic archive discovered at Amarna. I think that most of them, the original clay tablets, mostly in Akkadian, I believe. And they're a sort of snapshot of the diplomatic correspondence of the day. Of course, Amarna was built by Akhenaten as a center of his political and religious cult of Aten worship. And in the Amarna letters, we have a glimpse basically into the diplomatic life of Akhenaten. To my knowledge, no scholars that I know of or who I take seriously relate Akhenaten and the Exodus story. That was an idea that was pretty popular in the early 20th century with people, famously Freud wrote Moses and Monotheism, and other people have tried to connect Moses and Akhenaten. The problem is just the Exodus. We don't seem to have any evidence of the Exodus. And in fact, if you think about the historical timeline, the Exodus doesn't make any historical sense because let's say they would have gone out of Egypt, right? They'd crossed the Red Sea. Well, they wouldn't have left Egypt. They would have just been in a different part of Egypt because Egypt controlled everywhere all the way up the Shfela, all the way up to Kadesh, right? Basically to where Ramses II had signed the peace deal with Hashwili III, I think. And so that entire territory that we now think of as Israel-Palestine would have all been Egyptian territory. There were Egyptian garrison towns there. And so the Exodus story as we have it is an incorrect memory because historically they were in Egypt still. And so it's clearly a later person imagining Egyptian hegemony not extending into the Shfela, and of course through the Sinai, and then all the way up to what is now Syria and Lebanon. So I don't think there's any connection between the Amarna letters and the Exodus, mostly because there's no evidence the Exodus is a historical event. It's a very important mythological event, but I don't think it's a historical event. All right. What is 13 power? Also, what if someone has a tetragrammaton in their birth chart? The 4 beasts in Revelation, 4, 5 in a grand cross sidereal. I don't know what this question means. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what it means to have the tetragrammaton in their birth chart, like an astrological birth chart, because I'm not sure how you would have Hebrew letters in your birth chart. But then also I don't know the four beasts. So no, I'm sorry. This question is above my pay grade. So my apologies. Thank you, Sundog Creations. And Snowfox, thank you very kindly. $20 super sticker. I really appreciate that. Fulcanelli, I like Ike. I like Ike too. Great guy. I really, really appreciate Ike. All right, Greg, check out Miguel de Molina, something it's maybe, and Madame Guyon. I don't know who these people are, but I will take a look at them. Thank you. I will take a look at them. Maybe out of your wheelhouse, but any opinion on the scans from beneath the pyramids recently touted? I think they're nonsense. I think that both Sabine Hosfelder and there's a great YouTube channel called History for Granite. It's a great history channel just about the pyramids. And I think between those and several other things I've read, that the so-called scans that reveal these big structures underneath the pyramids are nonsense. Yeah, they're just rubbish. Not to say there's not mysteries about the pyramids. There's certainly mysteries about the pyramids. There's no doubt about that. Some of the really cool stuff they've done with muon scanning has revealed voids inside the pyramids that need to be explored. So there's still great mysteries about the pyramids, but there's no these scans that allegedly show these structures are basically nonsense. Kermit just wanted to say I was studying ancient languages because of this channel, and I'm having a lot of fun translating a book from Latin and Old English now. Well, wonderful. Good for you. There's very few things are more rewarding than the ability to look at a language that at one point you could not read anything, and then look at it and be able to say, I actually know what's happening in this language. So yeah, I'm glad that you're having success, and I'm really, really glad that this channel has been able to inspire you. Really hope that anytime this channel inspires folks to better themselves via education, whether that's learning languages or learning history or learning more about religion, I'm just absolutely stoked. That is like music to my ears. Yeah, congratulations on your language acquisition, and I'm glad the channel had a part to play in that. I really am. Yeah, Zebra recently had a chance to stay a couple weeks in Turkey. Very cool. I'd love to get to Turkey. I've only been to Turkey once. I got to spend a day there, and I got to visit Ephesus, which was really cool. And you're following up on about Thabit ibn Qura. Wonderful. I'm glad that you're engaging with that material. I want to do another episode on. I want to do an episode on Thabit, but I do want to do an episode on the Nabatean agriculture. So that is some content I want to do as well. So yeah, I appreciate that. Wonderful. Yeah, 17th century Christian mystics. Yeah, I don't know that I'll do an episode on Quietism, but I'm going to be focusing a little bit on this episode on Kant, on pietism and the role that the pietist movement played in Kant's spiritual development. So I'm going to be dealing with that as well. So yep, definitely want to deal with more Christian mystical movements. Agreed on the Exodus. However, I was referring to the Hyperloop prophet going around telling the Egyptian vassal cities to kill their kings, and then Akhenaten ghosting his vassal kings. I'm not aware of this of this source. I'd love to see it, but I mean the Hyperu were sort of a vague social grouping, right? Sort of people at the sort of edges of society, mostly. Sometimes they're brought in as mercenaries and stuff like that. But I'm not aware of a specific Hyperu prophet that I know of. I'd love to see I'd love to see that. But as for Akhenaten sort of ghosting his vassal kings, I mean, Akhenaten ghosted everybody. Now, this is part of the reason why the that as soon as Akhenaten was dead, I and eventually Horemheb did the very rational thing, which was to annihilate the rest of the royal family and restore Egypt back to the traditional cult. Because, I mean, from what we can tell from the Amarna letters, Akhenaten just wasn't hardly even engaging in politics. He had checked out basically and was doing his Aten worship stuff over there in Amarna. And all of the work that had been done by his ancestors to build up the Egyptian empire, he was just squandering basically. And so it's not that he just ghosted the vassal kings; he ghosted everybody. And you have people like Horemheb, who was a military general who would come up from the ranks, basically like, this guy's just he's a terrible king, because one of the things that kings have to do is they have to be able to maintain diplomatic relations with the rest of the world, and they have to be able to beef up their military and maintain an empire. And Akhenaten wasn't doing a terribly good job of that, and was spending a great deal of money building his city there in Amarna, which was huge. I think that when you really get up high, when you get to some of the big boundary stele up there, and look over the plain down to the Nile, and imagine what I think archaeologists now say it was 50,000 people there building that city. What a huge endeavor. But yeah, I when I think about and I think about Horemheb after the death of Akhenaten, I think that they were really interested in returning things to some state of normality, and quickly did. And I think Egypt was all the better as a polity for it. Ancient realpolitik was a pretty nasty thing. All right, folks. Well, let me grab some questions that are not super thanks, and because I definitely wanted to get to those. But let me get to some questions that were some of these. So many of the minor prophets seem pretty anti-establishment. Yes, I would say so. Amos. Woe to you, cows of Bashan. How did they become so popular when only highly educated people couldn't read and write? I think that we assume that the written text come first. And my guess is that folks like Amos, who's just one of the ones that's coming to mind, I imagine Amos was preaching or teaching, or he was talking out loud. And it's only later that these sort of admonitions that we get in the form of writings of Amos are written down. I think that they began orally, and therefore people were hearing it. They weren't reading it. And I think that anti-establishment people, people who speak truth to power, or ever how we want to put it, people like those people. People like when the state is being a bully, and people say, no, like, we're going to call this out. We're going to like tell you that God hates you, and God's going to judge you and kill you. We like when prophets, or these the so-called prophets or other kinds of people, call out bad behavior on the part of the rich and the powerful. And so I think that that's part of the reason why they became so popular, is that they were anti-establishment preachers, basically speaking on behalf of Yahweh. And I think we like that, when we feel like God is on the side of the poor and the disenfranchised and the powerless. I think that the poor, the disenfranchised, and the powerless very much enjoy when they have someone speaking on their behalf via Yahweh. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you liked the videos on Yahwism. It's so funny that that I made that Yahweh video on a lark. I was just happened to be laying in bed one day, and I thought to myself, like, you know what, I want to make a video on like Yahweh, like the early history of Yahweh. And at first I thought, it's not really appropriate for the channel, because this channel it's not really esoteric. There's nothing about Yahweh that's terribly esoteric. It's a pretty well-trod academic question that's been settled. Settled as much as it's going to be settled. The emergent consensus has existed now for 40, 50 years. And I made the episode just on a lark, and it ended up becoming the biggest episode of the channel, which is just hilarious that, And I kind of feel bad because I think many people subscribe to the channel thinking I would be making a lot more content like that. But the mandate of the channel is not to be covering so much, late bronze, early iron, Canaanite religion. But one of the things I noticed is that there's just such a dearth of content like that online on YouTube. And it's also something that I really like doing. I really like that material. I much prefer early Canaanite and Babylonian mythology to Egyptian mythology. I really don't find Egyptian mythology all that fascinating. And so I really like that mythology. I'm going to do an episode on Hittite mythology at some point soon too, with Teshub and all that. And so it's just interesting that there's not a lot of coverage of it. You have tens of thousands of videos on Egyptian mythology and a little bit on Babylonian and Sumerian mythology, although a lot of bad stuff. But you have basically nothing on Canaanite slash ancient Near East, specifically A&E, sort of the Levant with Baal and stuff. And so it's been a really fun process to be able to make videos on that stuff. And I'm going to be making new videos. I'm going to make a video on Anat. I'm going to make a video on Hittite mythology. Going to do a video on apocalypticism and the rise of monotheism. So yeah, a lot more to come when it comes to this material, because there's just not a lot of it on YouTube, and what is on YouTube is pretty bad. So I'm looking forward to being able to make that, to be able to make that material. So yeah, but the Baal episode did really, really well. People really like people like that stuff. Oh, great. Thank you. EA74. Let me write that down. It's a great one. So again, you always can be surprised by how much cool stuff you learn. I'm not an expert in all things Amarna archive but yeah, definitely looking forward to taking a look at it. I appreciate you pointing me in that direction. Is there any information transfer between East and West esotericism? So it depends on what you mean by East and West. That's that there's some debate about what is East and what is West. I would say that there's very minimal evidence of impact East to West or West to East in philosophically. So, for instance, we know that there were some Buddhist missionaries in Alexandria, but we see very little influence of something like Buddhism into Plotinus or something. We do know there were Greeks and hybrid Greco-Afghanistani kind of art and things like that, sort of at the limits of over there in what is now Pakistan. But we just don't see a lot of travel back and forth. We don't see a lot of intellectual travel back and forth. So the short answer is not really. Not really. I mean, we do know that there were evidence of Indian astrological stuff making its way via Persia into Arabic sources. But for instance, I don't know of any time in any literature in the East, I'm thinking of India and China, where you hear of Termes Trismegismus quoted. And I don't know of any instance in Coptic where the Diamond Sutra is quoted or the Heart Sutra is quoted. So I think the evidence is slim and meager, but that's not to say that there's no contact. Of course, there was trade, but I think the evidence for extensive influence is pretty meager. This is a Billy Carson question. Okay. Are you going on a trip to Egypt with Billy Carson? Definitely not. So Billy has to share a room with my wife because I have to stay with all my cats because he said a croc man would eat them. Yep. That sounds like, I mean, again, I don't want to say anything slanderous about Billy Carson. I think he's a person who is deeply interested in trying to get at the truth. But everything that I've seen by him is full of, and everything I've seen by him has been against my will. I did not consent to see any of it, but it's full of this nonsense Anunnaki rubbish. So again, it's just always a pity when someone who's clearly as intelligent as Billy Carson, who is passionate about the material, but also someone who's simply not willing to use scholarly rigor and real sources to dig into the material. So it's a pity, and it's a lost opportunity is what I would say. It's a lost opportunity because Mr. Carson has a large platform. He clearly is an intelligent person and really is passionate. It's just a pity that that's not underwritten by scholarly rigor, which is just, like I said, I would consider more of a lost opportunity and a tragedy more than anything else. So, but no, I'm not going to Egypt with Mr. Carson. At least not now. All right. I mean, yeah, I hope he's, yeah. Thoughts on elements of Christian mysticism in the music of the Grateful Dead or the larger body of Robert Hunter's lyricism present in his solo work? What if I told you I've never listened to the Grateful Dead? Ever. Like, I don't think I've ever, I don't know of a single Grateful Dead song. It's not a genre of literature. Like, I can't get into that kind of jammy kind of like Fish and that stuff. It's not for me. So no, I don't know anything about the impact of Christian mysticism in the work of the Grateful Dead because I don't know anything about the Grateful Dead. Do with me what you will. I am sorry. All right. Let's get a couple other questions or a few more. I have a little bit of time, so. Someone's talking about the Shomer Emunim. Yes, this is, in my opinion, the best book to start if you want to study real Kabbalah, like actual Kabbalistic text from an actual Kabbalistic source, from the inside, right? Kabbalah for Kabbalists. The Shomer Emunim is, in my opinion, the best text to start with, without any doubt. Without any doubt. I'm just scrolling up, folks, to grab. If you want to learn Hebrew, you should take a look at my my book recommendation list that you can see on my website. I have my advice for books to learn Hebrew. I also think that Digital Hammurabi offers lessons in Hebrew, and also Dan McClellan, I think, teaches a Hebrew class, biblical Hebrew. So, and Dan is a great scholar, and the folks at Digital Hammurabi are also wonderful folks as well. So I would recommend learning Hebrew from them if you want to learn to read Hebrew. All right. Was John the Baptist a psychonaut or a shaman? I don't think there's any evidence that he was. I think that he was probably a scene adjacent. That seems the most likely thing. It seems to me that he was a scene adjacent. Jesus may have been a scene adjacent too. I don't know if they were Essenes. I don't know. We don't really know a lot about the Essenes, but it seems like he was a scene adjacent somehow. But that's the best I could do. But no, I don't have any. We don't have any evidence. We don't know much about John the Baptizer, but that's the best. Speaking of John the Baptizer and Jesus, I'm gonna do an episode pretty soon on sort of who I think Jesus was. I don't know. Would folks be interested in this? I might put a poll up. Because one of the questions I get on the channel all the time is like, who do I think Jesus was? Like, what do I personally think about from my own scholarly perspective with esotericism and all that? What's my read on Jesus? And I've been resistant to do an episode like that because I don't like to editorialize on the channel, but I've gotten the question so much that I think I might do an episode that's sort of like an off the cuff, like, here's a 30-minute hot take about Jesus. And I'd probably base it mostly on Mark and Q. So at any rate, if folks are interested in sort of my own take on who I think Jesus was and what I think he was up to, if you're interested in that, please let me know. And I may do an episode on sort of, like I said, my hot takes on Jesus, the historical Jesus, of course. All right, just scrolling up to see about other questions. So some folks have been asking about Manly P. Hall. I've never read any books by Manly P. Hall. Manly P. Hall is a modern esotericist, a contemporary esotericist. I don't work in contemporary esotericism. So basically, I don't work in much after about 1750. So I've never read anything by Manly P. Hall. So yeah, it's hard for me to say one way or the other anything about him. I've never read Rudolf Steiner. I've never read Manly P. Hall. I don't really read Uspensky or Gurdjieff. Like these are all 20th century folks that I don't have much contact with and don't have a lot of interest in, honestly. But that's not to say they're not interesting. Of course, they're interesting. They're just not interesting to me. And so I don't have a lot of background in their works. So I think I could be wrong. I think Dana Trell has a high opinion of Manly P. Hall. I could be wrong about that. And if Dan has a high opinion of Manly P. Hall, then that bodes highly for him. But I don't know. Do not attribute that to Dr. Dana Trell, until he vouches for it. But no, I don't have. You guys would be surprised how. Maybe I could say it this way. I think most people come to the study of esotericism because they're wanting to become esotericists. So that is to say, they're coming at the study of esotericism because they're practitioners. They want something out of Western esotericism as a spiritual practice. I've never had much interest in Western esotericism as a spiritual practice. It's always been an intellectual exercise to me. That is to say, I've always been intellectually interested in it, but not practically interested in it. And so, therefore, because I've never had that practitioner bent, I've never gone to 20th century folks with a bunch of interest. People like Aleister Crowley or Dion Fortune or Gurdjieff or Steiner or whatever. So, because my interests are almost entirely historical and intellectual, the folks that are primarily practice oriented, I don't study them. 20th century folks, 19th century folks. So, I've done a little bit of stuff with Aleister Crowley, but I'm only interested in Aleister Crowley so much as he's done Enochian stuff, or I'm interested in Aleister Crowley insofar as he's done something with the Akephalos ritual, or I'm interested in him only insofar as these other kinds of things. So, folks have often said, like, why don't you do episodes? Why doesn't Esoterica cover the 20th century? The answer is because I basically lose interest in esotericism after about the 18th century. So the 19th century, the 20th century, the 21st century, I don't have a lot of interest in the past 3 centuries, I suppose, in the history of Western esotericism. And again, that's not to say that they're not interesting. Of course they are, but they're just not interesting to me. And again, if you really want to get into that material, the channel for you is absolutely Dr. Angela Puka's channel, Angela Symposium. She covers that period with wonderful rigor and regard, with much more competency on the material than I could ever have, because I don't have any competency in that material. So if you're interested in that material, sort of 19th and 20th century, 21st century material, you definitely want to be going to Dr. Angela Puka's channel. All right, so scrolling up, make sure to try to grab as many questions as I can before I scroll back down. Billy Mitchell. Is he the arcade game guy? Like the guy that plays like Pac-Man stuff? Yeah, he wears like the American flag ties. I think he also got in trouble, right, for some kind of shenanigans with video games. arcade games. But all right, just scrolling up, folks, to make sure that I didn't skip anything. Sorry, folks, just looking at this. A couple of questions for Ike we didn't get to. That's a pity, but maybe Ike he can handle them later. All right, just scrolling up. This is a great question. I understand that the Goetia is based on Weier's Pseudomonarchia Daemonum, at least in part. It's also based on the texts like the Liber Officiis and some other texts. But are the sigils in the Goetia, what are they based on? What's the original source for the Goetic sigils? I think the answer is we don't know. They show up in the Lesser Key of Solomon, basically intact as far as we have them. Now, sigils like the ones in the Lesser Key of Solomon are ubiquitous in medieval necromancy. I mean, we have sigils like that for planetary spirits and stuff like that. And they seem to be based on characteres that first appear in the Greek magical papyri. So we have those there. But the exact sigils that appear in the Lesser Key of Solomon, they may be based on an earlier French necromantic tradition that seems to have been part of what goes into creating the Lesser Key of Solomon. But to my knowledge, no one has ever given a coherent story about the exact derivation of the sigils in the Goetia, Lesser Key of Solomon. So if there is an explanation for where they come from specifically, I don't know what it is. But so far as I know, they are stylistically like many other sigils that we see from text from that time period, but they seem to appear out of whole cloth in the Lesser Key of Solomon. That's a great question, though. Now, I've often wondered with that. I've wondered with that as well. Interesting. Jonathan Bennett, I couldn't find anything related to Agrippa and Nettesheim when I went there. Yeah, this is a weird. We should ask the people, the Nettesheimers, if they want an Agrippa statue, and then we should raise money and then build an Agrippa statue, because Agrippa deserves a statue. And if not in Nettesheim, then he should certainly have one in Cologne. It'd be cool to like commission an Agrippa statue and get one made. So yeah, that would be great. All right, folks, I'm going to scroll back down, grab some other questions. I think I've gotten the ones that have been given over there. All right. What was your undergrad and how did it lead you academically to where you are now? As a philosophy student, I never knew of the Corpus Hermeticum, Agrippa, etc. Probably hear my dog barking. So my undergrad I was a double major. I double majored in religion and philosophy. And I came to undergrad already interested in sort of Hermetic philosophy, generally speaking. Or rather, I was interested already in philosophical schools that were not mainstream. So I was interested in Stoicism, which at the time was not a mainstream thing that folks were interested in. Very different now. Not that people are now also interested in Stoicism. People now are interested in some weird, corrupt, bizarre form of Stoicism. But yeah, I came interested in this material and already interested in and used basically the opportunity of being in a college environment to really just dig into the material. And of course, I had to take classes on normie philosophy too, Kant and Hegel and Plato and such, Descartes. But it was always an opportunity to dig into this material because I became increasingly convinced, and this was affirmed, of course, later with the work of Hanegraaff, that there was this entire underground movement of philosophy in Western philosophy, and that we were told that there was this one story, and that beneath it there was a different story, and that different story was fascinating to me because we were told the history of philosophy happened in a certain kind of way, But then as I studied the history of philosophy, it became more and more obvious to me that two things were true. One, there was this underground. And two, the underground had more of an impact on the development of Western philosophy, spirituality, and religion than anyone admitted. And that weird double truth that it existed and it was impactful in a way that most people had not taken for granted, that just, I don't know, called out to me as a fascinating, line of research. And so it just became a thing where I really wanted to get into it, and I did. And I never turned back, and I've always been interested in it. And it's a place where I'm not committed to the truth of the texts of Western esotericism, but I am committed to the fact that they need to be part of the conversation because they exist, just for one, and two, they've had an impact. And so we need to just integrate them into the way we tell the story of the development of Western philosophy, spirituality, and religion. So, but that's how I got into it. Really always been interested in it, and just used college as an excuse to double down on that. I'm a philosophy major who would like to read classical Greek texts with others as a retired layperson. Thank you for any suggestions. Yeah, I think that I don't know that they're classical Greek texts, but I do know that M. David Litwa is currently doing a reading group in Greek on the life of Pythagoras. That's by Porphyry, right? I think that's by Porphyry. And they're reading it in Greek. So if you're someone who wants to practice your ancient Greek, you should definitely practice it with someone like M. David Litwa, as opposed to practicing Greek with psycho people on the internet. Litwa's class is on. Litwa's class is ongoing now. I think I could be wrong about that, but you want to check out M. David Litwa and his class on reading the life of Pythagoras. Honest to goodness, I need to work on my Greek. My Greek has gotten so bad. Of all the ancient languages that I have some proficiency with, Greek has somehow really slipped the worst. And I'm not sure exactly how that's happened, but I used to be much, much better with my Greek than I am now. My Latin has gotten really, really good, but my Greek has gotten quite poor over the while. So I need to work on that. So maybe I need to be the one reading the life of Pythagoras in Litwa's class. This is a great question for like $2. Yeah. Would you fly the Anunnaki spaceship for $10,000? Yes. If you gave me $10,000 and let me fly in any spaceship, I would fly in any spaceship I would do it for free. And I was watching Andor, and I was watching I always love the ships like Slave One by that Boba Fett has. I like how it flies like sort of like that. But yeah, it was always Luthen's ship. I really love Luthen's ship in Andor. It's just like the most cool ship. So yeah, if I'd fly Luthen's ship, I'd fly in the Anunnaki ship. Maybe we could all fly together and go fight. What are the Greys from? Zeta Reticuli? Is that where they say they're from? I don't know. I can't keep track of what conspiracy theory bad people there are in the universe. Dias means God in Attic Greek. Yep. Fun fact, not the statue, and the statue was an expression of what is God nowadays is different to thing that is. Yeah, it's this. Zodiac, I can't quite tease out what you're asking. The grammar of this sentence is a little confusing to me. Yeah, maybe you can ask the question differently, but I would hate to not answer your question since you did a super chat, but I can't quite understand the grammar of it. Exorcism adjacent. That's a great name. Just asking the best way to go about combating new atheism types who say modern study of theology and the nature of religion is useless. I saw your podcast with Alex O'Connor. Yeah, Alex is a great guy. I just how to deal with the best way to go about combating them. I just wouldn't. I just wouldn't engage with them. I think people that have baselessly stupid positions that are informed by arrogance aren't worthy of responding to. So I think someone who has an opinion like that and who's like these sort of anti-theist types, yeah, it's like throwing trash on a dumpster fire. Just I would not engage with it. I think that it's stupidity informed by arrogance, and that's just toxic and not worth dealing with in the least. So my advice would be just to ignore those types because the study of theology and the nature of religion are fundamentally fascinating questions about what it is to be human. And anyone who thinks that's useless, they're just not interested in humanity. There's something inhuman about them. And that's, I don't know. It's born out of a trauma response. That's what it is. It's not that they actually think it's useless. It's that they are full of a kind of anti-religious hate, probably because they've been harmed by religion, that what's happening is like a trauma response. And so when they see it, they're not responding rationally. They're responding out of a place of deep hurt and deep fear and deep anxiety. And so maybe it actually isn't. I mean, maybe I should think a little deeper about this, that it's not arrogance, but it's agony performing as arrogance, which also many times arrogance is just agony. Underneath it, it's trauma. So those people need therapists, and you're not their therapist. You know, and I think even engaging with them, arguing with them at some level, just activates them further, deepens the wound in some ways, and so maybe that's not the best thing. So, yeah, I think they're for lots of reasons. They're just. I think those folks need. They need help. They don't need. They don't need someone to argue with them as an interlocutor. Yeah, I think Amos dropped earworms. Yeah, I agree. With Tiberian Hebrew pronunciation reconstructed, it's possible to get metrical rhythm in the poetry of Amos by incorporating Yemenite cantillation rhythm. That sounds all possible. Yeah, I think that the prophets spoke in poetic form. I mean, they have the prophecies are almost always poetry, and they have that kind of cadence and this kind of what's the right way of putting it? There's something beautiful about them. The repetitiveness and the parallelisms and that kind of poetic structures of Hebrew, of ancient Hebrew. Yeah, they're certainly there, and yeah, I think you can definitely appreciate their lyricality, which makes them all the more wonderful, right? When he calls them the cows of Bashan or whatever. There's something about just like making fun of people in verse, right? It's like a hip hop takedown, right? Where you're like able to like just rip someone apart lyrically. There's just something about that if you could watch a tyrant or a dictator or a wealthy person who misuses their wealth just be taken down by a impoverished farmer who has the gift of gab or whatever, the lyrical power of someone like, I don't know, Eminem or something. Who wouldn't want to watch that? It would just be fantastic. Um, so yeah, I think you're probably right. It's a great point. So I see some folks who are interested in my take on Jesus. Yeah, I might do it. Again, it's this kind of thing that, yeah, it would be sort of like I said, like a 30-minute hot take. So, yeah, maybe I will do it. You've been delving into Paracelsus and his works, and I've come across his neologism, the Elaster. Yeah, this is one of his famous ones. There isn't a lot of information about it, and I wanted to ask where I should look. Andrew Weeks is going to be your guy to look at that, and also Charles Webster's text on Paracelsus gets into a little bit of his cosmology, but basically the Alaster is sort of one of the fundamental stuffs out of which come the universe, along with the limbus. The limbus is the sort of substrate out of which living stuff comes from. But the Alaster is like the substrate. It's like the fundamental substance out of which all other substances arise, kind of a materia prima. So that's somewhat what it is. Now, also, I should be clear here about Paracelsus is he's not consistent at all about this stuff. He makes up words, he wields them inconsistently. So when you study Paracelsus, you'll get lots of different things about these sort of, what he thinks these things are. So I think Charles Webster's book has good stuff on sort of Paracelsus's cosmology as much as it is a specific, unified cosmology. But yeah, I'll be doing an episode on his cosmology at some point soon. So that is in the works. That's in the works. Was there a sense of the ontological reality of language or poetry as a means to manifest knowledge? I don't know, to manifest knowledge, but certainly in Kabbalah and in many other forms of mysticism and esotericism, there definitely was the idea that language was real and had magical power. That is to say, you could conjure things into existence through speech. This absolutely, happened when Sefer Yetzirah, right, where you can speak. God speaks the world into being, and speech has this kind of power. So that's certainly true. That's certainly true vis-a-vis something like Sefer Yetzirah. And of course, you have characteres and other magical signs, hieroglyphics. The Egyptians certainly thought of their language as having some kind of divine origin or divine power. But I don't know if it manifested knowledge specifically, but it was ontologically real and non-arbitrary in the way that we think of language now as being the relationship of sign and signifier being arbitrary, a la Saussure. That was certainly not true for pre-modern people. Dan has chimed in about Manly P. Hall. Dan reveals that he is in fact ambivalent about Manly P. Hall. Dan, I'd be curious to hear about what exactly is your ambivalence about Manly P. Hall. Just if there's something specific you'd want to say, but I don't know. I've never read his books. I don't even think I own them. I don't think I even own them. Yeah, so Dan says he loves Manly P. Hall as a storyteller and as a rhetorician, a torchbearer for Thomas Taylor. Dan, you are now the torchbearer for Thomas Taylor. You are the living voice of Thomas Taylor. Yeah, and so the sort of perennialism, right, that kind of puts him in a not so great situation, So, but I think what Dan means by that, right, is that this is always a problem with perennialism. It takes all this stuff and flattens it out and says, yeah, everything's connected and everything's part of one thing. And that is, while perhaps spiritually interesting, it is historically very dangerous and just incorrect. Joel, you're wondering if I ever do an episode on human sacrifice in early Judaism. I did do one. I did one on Molech, the Molech, the so-called the ritual sacrifice of the Molech. So I have done a whole episode just on the Molech, and I do talk about Jephthah and his daughter and the Tophet and all that stuff. So check out that episode on check out that episode on the Molech. You had a dream. You were lost in an old medieval castle, and for some reason, Dr. Justin Sledge was there. Of course, that was there. That was definitely like to get lost in a medieval castle. That sounds like a lot of fun. In fact, I think one of the worst hangovers I ever had was in Belgium. we were out all night. Like the former Communist Party headquarters of Belgium's been turned into a bar, and they just kept all the old Communist Party stuff there. But at any rate, they served like lambic and like chuza and like sour beer there, and I was really into that at the time, and I drank so much that night. And I remember the next day we were going on a tour of some castle somewhere in the Low Countries. I can't remember even now where it was, but they had a spiral staircase inside of this castle, and I was like walking down the spiral staircase, and I was like so hungover that I stopped, and I felt like I was still going down the staircase, and it's like, oh god, I'm gonna throw up in this spiral staircase. It's so bad. I didn't, thank God, but that was terrible. That was terrible. The idea that Solomon used demons to build the temple, is this accurate, or is it an allegory? It's, I don't know that it's an allegory. I think it's a great story. And it solves a problem, right? Because there's a problem in the story where not only does the altar inside the temple need to be of unhewn stone, the entire temple needs to be somehow made of unhewn stone. And so you get this elaborate mythology around the Shamir worm and Asmodeus and all this stuff. But I don't know that it is either allegorical or truthful. I mean, I do think that there was probably a historical Solomon. I do think he probably built the temple. I don't think he used demons or a magical worm, but it'd be a lot cooler if he did. Amsterdam is no longer the only esotericism program out there. Exeter has a program. There's some programs at Rice. University of South Carolina has a program in magic, but I think they offer degrees only up through master's degrees. I think Amsterdam remains one of the only places that offers a degree up to the level of a PhD, I think. But you can also get a PhD somewhere else and study an esoteric topic. So that is also possible. You think of, again, think of someone like Dr. Dana Trell was up in Canadiastan and was studying Ficino at Guelph or Waterloo. But anyway, you could study an esoteric topic as a PhD. That's totally possible. Someone's asking about the ditty and the intro outro. It comes from Chopin's Nocturnes, Nocturne number 1, toward the end. But recorded by the wonderful YouTuber. Oh, now her name is slips my mind. It's so terrible. She does great musical theory videos. Someone can correct me. I can't believe I can't remember her name. It's slipping my mind now. But she does really, really great music theory videos, and she recorded it for me, which is really great. All right. Why did they excommunicate Spinoza? We don't know exactly, probably for several reasons, some of which are probably intellectual, some of which are maybe social. He had beef with his sister, and they often would use excommunication as a mechanism by which to rein people in, but also he was flirting with Cartesian philosophy. So I suspect he was some combination of social pressure for him to settle business with his sister, but also he was an open Cartesian, and I think that they did not want him to be an open Cartesian. And yeah, I think that's part of the reason why he got excommunicated. All right. Just looking down through to get some more questions. So at the end here. Oh, this is a great question. Where can I learn more about the wild monastic life at the University of Paris? Where did you read that some people were caught attempting to use the Disquidione Magicarum for magic? So you can learn more about the sort of wacky life of the University of Paris. There's a 3-volume history of the university. And let me see who it's by. Of course, I'm not going to be able to find it. It's upstairs, actually, from where I am. But I'll try to find it and put it in the. If you leave the question later, history of the university in Europe. It's a 3-volume set by Walter Rugg, and it details the stuff at the University of Paris, and it's really, really, really great. Really, really worth reading. About the people, the cult attempting to use the investigations of the magic for using magic, you can find that story in the introduction to the new Braille edition. So in volume 1, there's a big introduction to the Disquisitionem, and in there's a reference to the guy that was arrested, and he was found to have a copy of it. So there you can find it. Yeah, any plans to do an episode on Athanasius Kircher? Yep, definitely going to do one on Athanasius Kircher at some point. It's just so huge. I mean, he was less an individual person and more like a research program. He had all kinds of people working for him in Rome, so it's hard to reel in all the enormous output performed by Athanasius Kircher. But yeah, one day I will do ultimately get to him. Thank you, Greg. Your channel was a spark that reignited my passion for the history of philosophy and religion and thought in general. Thank you for the responses. You're welcome, Greg, and thank you for the kind words in the super chat. I really appreciate it. Yeah, again, as an educator, I am just really happy that this channel inspires folks to better themselves via education and unapologetically dive into arcane and strange topics just for the love of it. And I feel like that's just a thing we need to cultivate and deepen and make more rich. So I'm glad that the channel has inspired you to do that. Well, would you have a beer with Kant or Agrippa? Oh, definitely Agrippa. I think Kant's more of a wine dude, although he was a German, I suppose. Yeah, I would love Kant, Agrippa, and Sledge walk into a bar. Yeah, I would love to have drinks with both of them. But yeah, I think Agrippa over Kant. Because the kind of questions that I would want to tease Kant about, they're just like technical, nerdy questions. But Agrippa I really wanted to know about him in a lot of ways. So I'm not really interested in Kant as a person, or less interested, much more interested in Agrippa as a person. Have I done anything on Shabbatai Tzvi? Yes, I've done a couple episodes on Shabbatianism. I've done one on the Drush Naim, the treatise on the dragons, and I've done a couple of other videos on Shabbatian theology. So yeah, I've done a couple episodes on Shabbatai. What a weird, kooky dude. Is there any way to learn the Zohar without knowing Hebrew? Sure. I mean, the Zohar is written in Aramaic. I mean, I know that's a really pedantic thing to say, but it is written in a very peculiar form of Aramaic, which I'm going to be dealing with in a minute, because I'm going to go study the Zohar a little bit after I do this, in honor of Lag BaOmer. Yeah, there's the Pritzker translation is fine. It's great. It's wonderful. You can absolutely learn the Zohar very deeply. You can learn it very well in the English translation by Daniel Matt. I mean, he's really, really wonderful. So, absolutely. Could you do a vid on Titus Vespasian's title? I don't know. I don't know what you're asking about specifically. But yeah, maybe say a little bit more in the chat about it, but maybe. Were you a gamer back in the day? What was it like? No, I've never been a gamer. The last game that I played, or the last games that I played with any kind of enduring interest were like the Castle Troid games or Metroidvania or whatever they call them. Like the Castlevania games, but sort of like Metroid style, like Circle of the Moon and Symphony of the Night, or no, Symphony of Castlevania Symphony of something. Yeah, those games, like the PlayStation one and then the Game Boy Advance ones. I played those. Um, but I think that's the last games that I really played were those Castlevania games. So I never played like any sort of uh, recent games. It just takes too much time, and I don't have the time, unfortunately. Not that I think gaming's bad. I think gaming's really good, but I think it can be good. I think being social and having fun together is a great thing, and if video games allow you to do that, good for you. I think people who shame game playing people are that's just silly. But it's funny. I have just out here on the landing of my office. I have my wife's Nintendo. They had a Nintendo growing up, and they kept their like ancestral Nintendo. And so when I inherited it, because my sister-in-law lives with us, she got the Nintendo, and I recapped it. I recapped the whole thing to get new capacitors in there to make sure, and then I took out the 72-pin chip and restored it and all that. And I bought all the games that I liked to play when I was a kid, when I had a Nintendo. And my children play with me. They play like Duck Hunt and like Castlevania. So my children will be on the landing with me playing, Duck Hunt, and I think we were playing Castlevania 3 the other night, and we're just like playing old school Nintendo games. I don't that their horizon for technology with video games is like 1988. They're not aware that video games exist not after 1988, so it's going to be quite a surprise for them when they realize that there are 2025 video games that are photorealistic or whatever, and not like digitized 8-bit ducks and dogs and stuff. With all your vast knowledge, which is definitely not what I have, do not have vast knowledge. What belief system do you think to be the most accurate? I don't think any of them are the most accurate. I think that the scientific method has been extraordinarily successful. Not the mythological version that we tell ourselves exists from middle school, but like that research program has been successful. I tend to be pretty keen on systems that are pretty logic heavy, but those are coherent, but they're not complete. And do I think they're accurate? I don't know. I don't think accuracy is in the cards for human beings. So I think that, and also I think that our philosophical interests tend to be much more reflective of our personalities than we'd like to admit. I think Nietzsche has a quote along the lines of this. And so I'm not sure that any of them are totally accurate. I think so some of them are just less wrong, or at least more able to be interrogated by reason. And if they're better able to be interrogated by reason, then all the better. But are they accurate? I don't know that they're accurate. I don't know that they're accurate. I currently have a 3.8, 3.9 GPA. Good for you. Well done. Is there any possible way in how I could transfer to Rice University to study Western esotericism? It's a private university. I'm sure they'll take you. I mean, you're going to pay out the wazoo to go there. But yeah, you can go to Rice. As Dan points out, Claire Finger's there. So sure. Claire Finger's there. Who is the Gnosticism person that's there? Really famous person who does Gnosticism. My brain is really like not working well today. But yeah, the Rice program, that's probably great. Again, I think it's going to cost you a pretty penny, but you certainly can go do it. Oh, I can't believe her name. April DeConnick. April, yes, she's there. April DeConnick. She's wonderful. All right. I'll grab a couple more questions and probably call it an afternoon. I'm going to go build a bonfire and study some Zohar. Study some Zohar. In the Sefer HaRazim, it uses a placeholder N for the name of the user. N, son of N. Is there a reason for this choice? It's just, they're just translating Plony ben Plony, or some other version of that. There's just like we use John Doe in English. In Hebrew, it's Plony. I'm sure they're just using N for short for nomen, name. And that's the only reason why. It's just a translation. What's the right name? It's just a translation convention. But typically it's just, and often it's just Plony, which is just like John Doe or whatever in English. What are the main origins of Kabbalah? What are some good resources for this? The principal origins of the Kabbalah are the speculative Jewish text of like 13th century Spain and France. And the big folks who are studying this stuff are, of course, Gershom Scholem, Moshe Dell. Those are the big starting places. So, you'd want to study there and then dive into more specific texts as you go on. So, so there you go. That's where I would start. Oh, and for folks who don't know this, I have a huge reading list available on the channel that kind of gives you sort of the standard academic sources for the literature. So if you're interested in Kabbalah, you can go to the Kabbalah section, and those are the books that I would recommend for you to study Kabbalah or medieval necromancy or Gnosticism or whatever. So if you've not seen that list, you should definitely check that list out if you're interested in getting the lay of the land of a specific topic. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I've heard that Kabbalah has been designed by women in its inception. How true is that? I don't know of any evidence of that being true. I do know that the one of the principal architects of the Zohar, Moshe de Leon, was actually ratted out by his wife after he died. People went looking for the origins of the Zohar, and they eventually came and found Moshe Leon's wife and asked, like, where did he get this from? And she famously said that he wrote it out of his own head and sold it to people, no less. And so, in a funny way, Moshe de Leon's wife kind of sold him down the river after he was dead. But I don't know of any evidence that it was primarily designed by women. I don't think that's true. I don't think there's any evidence for that. The best way to reach me is via my website, just justinsledge.com. There's a little contact button there, and you can reach me there. It is an ancestral Nintendo. Yeah, yep. We're gonna have it, and it's gonna last for a while. I recapped it, so it's gonna last a long time. God willing. Pass it down to my children, and they will have it in their children. The ancestral Nintendo will go down the lines. Castlevania 3 is great. It's one of the first games I remember beating back in the day. I even remember, like, I was at my brother's friend's house, and I had a little notebook with all the Castlevania stage codes, right? It was like the grid with like the holy water and the cross and the whip and all that, and you have to like put them in a certain way. And I remember like having a little notebook carrying around, and I finally managed to beat Dracula, who turns like 3 forms. It's really hard, like NES hard. So that was the game has a special place in my heart for that reason. You often quote Nietzsche. Do I often quote Nietzsche? I don't know if I often quote Nietzsche. What are your thoughts on the guy and his philosophy? Nietzsche is super important. I mean, there's no getting around him. You have to respond to him, especially his critique of religion, his critique of morality. So I don't tend to like the genealogical method. I tend to think that the genealogical method, as invented by Nietzsche and deployed by people like Foucault, is terribly misleading. So I'm not a big fan of that way of doing philosophy, but I don't think there is any way of being a modern person and trying to think seriously about morality without taking Nietzsche's critique seriously. In fact, when I teach intro ethics, I end the class with Nietzsche. So I teach a very analytic intro ethics class. I'm trained in both analytic and continental philosophy. My ethics classes tend to be very, very analytic, but I end the class with Nietzsche. So with the genealogy of morals. So I think highly enough of him to basically make him be the kind of capstone of my, when I teach ethics, he's kind of the capstone of the class, in the sense that he's sort of like the monkey wrench I throw into the mix of deontology and utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and all that. When I play D&D, my favorite class is DM. I haven't played a character in ages, since I was a teenager. I've always DM'd, for better and for worse. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate the super sticker. Matthew Barker, have I been discussing Paracelsus with other scholars since my trip? What further developments have I had? Will there be a follow-up video? I have not discussed my Paracelsus stuff with anybody. I don't know that. I mean, I've had a couple people ask me if I'm going to publish like an academic article about it, and I'm not going to do that probably. And some people have asked, like, are you going to publish on Paracelsus? And I'm like, I did. Like, am I going to spend a lot of time writing an academic article? No, I just don't care. Just don't care. If some smart academic folks want to take my lead on this question of Paracelsus, they're welcome to quote my YouTube video. But I'm just less interested. I'm more interested in trying to shift the platform of where intellectual labor can be done to get away from this specifically journal oriented way of doing knowledge production. So, but no, I haven't talked to many people about it. Yeah, I'd be curious to see what, Voucher and other folks think, but Voutonograph, of course. But no, I'm not gonna do much more. I don't know if there's gonna be a follow-up video anytime soon. I don't think so. I am going to be doing a follow-up video on Hermeticism, but it's going to be at the end of the story of Hermeticism. In the sense that Paracelsus is sort of a story about what the beginning of Hermeticism might have looked like. Now, the episode I'm going to do next is going to be on what the end of Hermeticism looked like. And it's going to focus a bit on Americ Casaubon and stuff like that. But thank you for asking. And Qpot, thank you for supporting the channel. All right. What do I think about Bataille? That's a big question. Bataille was a pretty important thinker in my life on several occasions for several different reasons. What do I think about Bataille? Bataille is also a character who I've made a whole episode about him. So if you want to know what I think about Bataille, you can watch my episode about Bataille. But I think he's one of these characters that that's the best. He's very niche and very important in that niche. I mean, he might be the whole niche. So yeah, I think his concept of base materialism and the concept of the accursed share, they're all welcome contributions to any theory of materialism that isn't vulgar. I think Bataille is a great corrective to vulgar materialism. So, and I think his theory of the erotic is just like really, really well done. And yeah, I think he's a super smart. I find him terribly fascinating, and he deeply influenced my thought a lot. So what's my cutoff date roughly? Basically like 1770s. I mean, I think the last esotericist that I would be really interested in would probably Swedenborg. I think Swedenborg would be sort of the end of where it's basically at Swedenborg where I kind of I run off the cliff and I lose interest. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the episode on Kant this week, and it's not surprising that Kant also deals with Swedenborg in a certain kind of way. But yeah, I think Swedenborg is probably one of the last that I find intellectually compelling. After that, I don't tend to find a great deal of esotericism terribly intellectually interesting. There's exceptions to that, Austin Osman Spare being an exception to that, but in general, I'm not. I lose interest pretty quickly, intellectual interest. My favorite classical pianist. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the piano. I love the harpsichord a lot. I like Baroque music a whole lot. Like a lot of Corelli and stuff like that. But classical pianist, I don't know. I mean, I would say Glenn Gould, and of course the Goldberg variations are pretty constant thing I'm listening to. But that's like so stereotypical, right? But yeah, I don't have a specific one that I'm like really about. And I think saying Glenn Gould is just like the most cop-out answer possible. The translation of the Egyptian Book of the Dead that I'd recommend is the Faulkner edition of the Book of the Dead, or the Book of Coming Forth by Day. The old E.A. Wallace Budge version is pretty dated now, so I think that it's cool to have, but not really reliable scholarly. But I think the Faulkner edition is typically thought of as the best. Necromancy means communication with the dead. It doesn't. Necromancy means to do divination via the dead. That's different. Why do the medievals seem to associate it with the exorcism of demons? Do they conflate demons with the dead? No. So it's just that nigromanteia and necromanteia are the same thing typically. And necromanteia and nigromanteia just mean like doing supernatural causation via demonic powers. But it's just that the word just changed meanings, like words do. Words change meanings. I mean, if you were to say in 1890, like, let's go be gay in the forest together, that's going to mean something very different than in 2025. They both might be fun, but they're very quite queer and for different experiences probably. Just the word necromanteia and necromanteia just changed their meaning from the classical Greek when they were converted into Latin and eventually how being used in the Middle Ages, because that's what words do. They just change their words, change meaning over time, and so that's the way things go. Yeah, 1687 would be a nice cutoff point because of Newton the Principia, but I also think that there's really important stuff that goes on in the 18th century. Less important stuff to me, at least. But like I said, the 1770s is probably the latest where I have a lot of interest. But even to the 17th century, like alchemy really begins to lose interest for me through the later part of the 17th century. The end of the 17th century, alchemy gets less and less interesting in some ways. All right. A couple more. I'm going to call it a day. All right. No, Josh, there were lots of great alchemists after Newton. No, there were lots of really great, a lot of great Paracelsians who certainly were functioning after Newton. Newton was a cool alchemist, but he was by no means the best or the greatest or the last. Would I do an episode on the Devil's Bible? No, not really, because it's not really interesting. I mean, in the sense that it's just a big Bible with a big picture of the devil in it. I mean, I think it's basically a Vulgate Bible. I think there's some of the Vetus Latina in there, but it's just a big Bible with a big picture of the devil in it. And I know there's a legend attached to it that it was written in one night and stuff like that, but it's not an interesting Yeah, it's not interesting in the sense that it's worthy of an esoteric episode, because I think it's just a Bible. It's just a Bible. Planish any further translations in the same vein as your Agrippa book? Maybe it, it depends on, maybe, like, getting, maybe Dan and I working together on something, but at this point it would just be, it would just be a question of finding a text that we think would be interesting to work on together and getting it out. I mean, there's so much material, and Dan's working on, huge projects on his own. And so, maybe, there's lots of texts I would love to work on and translate together and do some introductory work for, but nothing immediately jumps to mind in terms of, any specific kind of thing. So, but maybe. Yep, I did hear about them, the recently turning lead into gold at CERN. But they've done this before, right? They've transmitted, bismuth and mercury, I believe, to highly radioactive forms of gold. So this is, in some sense, it's neat because it's lead. But alchemists work with all kinds of metals, not just lead. But it's neat. But I guess that they've nuclear transmutation has been achieved in the early 20th century, or in the 20th century. So, so that's it's interesting and not at the same time. I don't have any thoughts about Fulcanelli and sort of occult alchemy stuff in the 19th century, or 20th century for that matter. I think that it makes for great stories, and that's about it. It doesn't have much of an actual connection to historical alchemy and, myths that they achieve chemical transmutation, or, they're laughable. It's just chemical transmutation is not possible. So, not so much interest. All right, folks. Well, I appreciate you hanging out with me. It's great to see folks. Great to hang out. Great to see everybody, and appreciate all your thoughtful questions. And I'm gonna take it easy. Have a bit of a break, and but I really appreciate you hanging out with me. I hope you guys have a great night. If you observe Shabbat, you should. I hope you have a great Shabbat. Wonderful Lag Bomer. Like I said, I'm going to go try to celebrate some Lag Bomer by studying some Zohar myself. And all things told, I really appreciate everybody hanging out with me, and look forward to a new episode next week on Kant and mysticism, the possibility of what could be called critical mysticism, which I think is something that, if mysticism is going to exist now, it has to be critical. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by critical mysticism next week. So, all right, folks, well, have a great weekend. Have a great night. And I will see folks next week for a brand new episode. Take it easy.